Ladies and gentlemen, angry Americans around the country and around the globe, happy Pride, happy summer. Welcome to a very important, inspiring conversation with someone I am delighted to know and very happy to have a conversation with, especially right now. She is a master of politics, of culture, of so many things that I'm excited to get into, but is a true inspiration, an activist, a fighter, a patriot, the great and powerful Charlotte Clymer. How are you, my friend?
Hey, Paul, how you doing?
I am great. I am excited to be talking to you. Where are you and how are you?
Okay, well, I am in Washington, D.C., Southeast Washington, D.C., near RFK Stadium. And I am not doing too bad. You know, this crisis has kind of dragged on for several months and DC's slowly climbing its way out of the hole, but, you know, we're doing okay here.
And because it's Angry Americans, we are all dealing with tough times in different ways. And my mother's been on me about the drinking on the show, so I'm going to try to shift maybe repeat guests toward fitness or something else. But I want you to please share with us, Charlotte, what is your favorite cocktail or adult beverage of choice and why?
I'm going to give you two. My favorite, like my all-time favorite drink is the French 75. It is the tastiest shit. I love it. Like I will order it at any bar, but you can't always get the French 75. So in DC, when I'm here, I drink DC Brow, which is, you know, one of our local distilleries, and I love good beer. So
I love it. You will be pleased to know that I have tried to concoct a French 75.
Oh, I love it. Look at that.
I didn't know what it was until I asked you in advance and you sent me a note, and I don't have a champagne glass, but can you please share with our audience what's in it? Because I think it's delightful. It's an amazing summer drink. It's so tasty and I'm completely hooked.
I'll be real with you. I forgot what's in it. I forgot all the ingredients. Write it down for me.
It's gin, simple syrup, lemon juice. What else? Now I have to look it up. But interestingly, because we're both Army vets, I read that it was concocted in a New York bar in Paris and named after a French 75 millimeter field gun because it packed such a punch.
Is that what? Are you serious? Wow.
That's what the internet's told me. I don't know if it's true or not, but
we just can't get away from the Army. That's what this is.
Right? So how did you first get introduced to that drink? Do you remember?
Yes, it was last summer. I was at a friend's place and she was like, "Hey, have you ever had a Prince 75?" And I'm like, "No, what the hell is that?" She's like, I'm about to blow your mind. And she mixes the drink for me and I drink. It was just the tastiest goddamn thing I've had in quite a while. Because I usually stick to beer. I'll do wine, and I'll do just straight vodka. Like those are my three go-tos. But God, I mean, gee, it's so damn good. And here's the great thing about it. You could guzzle these down like one after the other without thinking, and it'll take a minute, but it'll hit you like a brick.
So I looked it up. It's 1 ounce gin, ½ ounce fresh lemon juice, a ½ ounce simple syrup, 3 ounces of champagne or other sparkling wine, and garnish with a lemon twist. And
I like how with the twist you just like kind of plunked your little slice of lemon.
Yeah, this is a really shitty twist.
That's an Army twist is what that is.
This is the kind of twist you do when you have an 18-month-old crawling on your leg and you hope you grab the knife. And it's your last lemon.
That's a Father's Day twist is what that is.
It's a little bit of an old lemon, I won't lie to you. But cheers to you, Charlotte. I'm sorry we can't do this in person, but cheers. It's an honor and a privilege to have you on the show. So much I want to get into with you. Yeah. Because you've really, I think, burst onto the political scene in the last couple of years. We met, I think, only for the first time at the White House Correspondents' dinner, right?
That's right. Yeah, about a year ago, in fact.
So I just read that has been postponed or canceled. For those of us who've been there, it's maybe for me, Charlotte, one of the most surreal experiences I've ever had in my life. But can you share your thoughts? I don't know if that was the first time if you've been or you've been before, but your thoughts on someone who had burst onto the political scene and then you're at the White House Correspondents' dinner. What was that like for you?
So I've been a political nerd since I was a kid. Like even in trailer parks in Central Texas, I would watch C-SPAN and read political biographies. I just love that shit. I always have. And the White House Correspondents' dinner, every year, the White House Correspondents Association, which is the White House press corps, and the folks who cover like the White House and the office of the presidency, they'll get together. They'll do this massive dinner for everyone who's anyone in political circles, and a bunch of Hollywood celebrities come. And usually the president will give a speech. And then they'll have like an entertainer for the year, and it's usually like some kind of stand-up comedian. They've like Jon Stewart has done it.
Mm-hmm.
Stephen Colbert did a really famous one in 2006 when he completely eviscerated Bush at the dinner. And so for ours though, Donald Trump has never come to one of these because he doesn't want to be made fun of, because it's kind of a semi-roast. Right. Like people will come to hear jokes about whoever's president at the time. It's all in good fun. It's supposed to be this like kind of lighthearted thing. And Donald Trump is so thin-skinned that he can't do it. And so for ours, it was the historian. Who was the historian?
I forgot who he was, but
my God. Ron Chernow. Ron Chernow.
Thank you.
Yeah, writer of Hamilton.
Yep.
And I got to tell you, I thought it was going to be a boring thing. Like, he's a great writer, don't get me wrong, but he gave an amazing damn speech. Yeah. That was incredible. He threw a ton of shade in there. People were laughing during this, what was supposed to be a serious speech because he was great at it. But the surrealness though that you spoke of, you're walking around into like these rooms where like because there's the main ballroom with the dinner, but before the dinner, it's a bunch of like rooms outside of the ballroom, and there's all of these political celebrities, like people you see in the news all the time. So I passed by Sean Spicer at one point. Like I would never assault someone, but I kind of wanted to punch him. I just kept walking. I saw a bunch of talking heads on MSNBC. I ran into Joanne Reed, I think. So there's a lot of just really fantastic people. Every member of Congress you can think of usually goes, especially if they're part of that president's party. So yeah, it's a great time. What do you think of it?
It is, I think, among the most surreal experiences. It's the weirdest event I've ever been to, because it's such an assemblance of the weirdest group of people. Like, I was sitting at the NBC table, and then you see people like Andrea Mitchell, and then I saw Governor Pritzker, the governor of Chicago, then the Fat Jew, the guy, the comedian, the online comedian.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And it's just such a collision of people in one room, a combination of people that you admire or you've grown up watching, and a group of people you want to punch in the face, right? So it feels like they call it nerd prom, but it's like,
that's right.
It's even more than that. I mean, my favorite part of it was, I've gone a couple times, and mostly because Rachel Maddow doesn't like to go. And she's been a friend and a supporter for many years. And as an activist, she understood that I could use her ticket. And it was beneficial for me to be there to represent veterans, to talk to people, to build and often I was the only veteran in the room, which you can relate to. Oh, yeah. And so at one point, I wear a tuxedo, and I'm a big, bald, white guy. So oftentimes when I do that, people think I'm Secret Service. and I had a lapel pin on. And at one point, I came down the stairs into the grand ballroom, and there was a potted plant at the bottom of the stairs, and a guy saw me and kind of hid behind the potted plant. And I was walking down slowly trying to figure out, and he sticks his head up, and it's Zach Galifianakis. And Zach Galifianakis had a drink, and I guess he thought you weren't supposed to bring drinks into the main room. He thought I was security, so he tried to hide his drink before I could see him. And I was like, hey, man, I'm a big fan. I'm not security. Drink all you want, dude. You're Zach Galifianakis. He was like, oh, okay, cool, no problem, right? And then I go in and I see like Marcus Lemonis from The Prophet, and like the most random assemblance of people. But that was my great Zach Galifianakis story. And
you should have asked him for a hit. Like, do you have any weed on you, man, or something like that?
It would have made it more bearable. But it is a surreal. This whole political time is such a surreal experience. And you've been a master of integrating your social media presence, interacting with candidates, raising stories up your own and empowering others. But you grew up in Texas, right? You talked about your humble beginnings. And I want to ask you, Charlotte, the question that we ask of everyone. When you were growing up in Texas, Charlotte Clymer, what was your first car?
Oh, first car. Okay. So my junior year of high school, my father, in one of probably the few purely generous acts he ever did for me, bought me a 1974 F-100 pickup. For $500, and then I had to pay it off over the next couple months. But I tell you what, I love that goddamn truck. I loved it so much. The clutch was terrible. It had to be replaced twice. One time at an intersection, I had to get out of the car, or I had to get out of the cab and sneak underneath to like readjust the clutch manually so I could get back in and drive off. But I loved it. It was mine, and it had this funky, weird mildew smell that grew on me, and I just, whenever I think of that smell, I'm so happy. I really am.
And Charlotte, what year was it? Do you remember? And what color was it?
1973 Ford F-100 yellow, like mustard yellow. Yeah.
Mustard yellow.
Yeah. Yeah.
That makes an impression.
Ugliest fucking truck. I mean, just, weird brown, shitty upholstery inside. I loved it. I mean, that was my truck. It was my baby. And then when I joined the Army, I think my father sold it off or something like that. But God, I loved it.
So did it have a name?
I never gave it a name. No.
It feels like a vehicle that needs a name, right? Like if you come back in another life and you go through that journey, I feel like you got to come up with a name for that truck, right?
I want to get one like it again. Like that's one of my goals. When I move out into, maybe when I move back to Texas, like I'll find a truck just like that and buy it again.
So you talked about going from Texas into the Army and then eventually West Point, right? Yeah. You've been a great advocate for many communities and groups of people, but to include veterans. And you've been a real, I think, powerful and important voice for our veterans community. Can you talk a little bit about, why'd you join the Army? What'd you do in the Army? And, you've told this story many times, but especially for a community that is made up of many veterans and folks who care about veterans issues and the military and national defense. What do you want folks to know about that experience that you had?
I feel like the military has become a partisan institution in a way that I really don't like. It's this thing where I even see a lot of far left, like folks on the very far left, who look at the military as an institution or a tool of evil, or imperialism is what I hear said. And what I want to tell them is like, some of the best and brightest in our country join the military for very good reasons. The military does incredible work that, is almost never reported on, as much as it should be anyway. And the worst parts of how politicians exploit our service is the image that is presented to the world about us. So they never see the community projects we do. They never see the incredible relationships that are formed, taking especially folks from, poor backgrounds, giving them a baseline education, giving them money for college when they get out. Like there's so many things about the military I love, but unfortunately what it's defined as is this exploited tool of corrupt politicians. And that's really unfortunate. I joined the Army not too long after I turned 19. I was, this was 2005. I was against the Iraq War from day one. I knew it was a bad idea. Like even then, being like a smart ass, 16-year-old, I knew it was a bad idea. But to me, it really hit home the summer after high school. I came back after like 1 or 2, weeks at this job I was working. And I saw on the news that the death toll in Iraq had hit 1,000. And something about that really made me feel guilty. And not because I necessarily wanted to be part of this war effort, but I felt like there were 19-year-olds like me serving in Iraq and Afghanistan, and here I was at home doing nothing, except working this minimum wage job and, trying to pay for community college. And I wanted to be part of something bigger than myself, and I wanted to share in the sacrifices of my generation because I was a self-righteous little shit. And so I went to a recruiter the next day and we started talking through it. I did the ASVAB. I was at the recruiter station and I remember the recruiter being like, okay, well, you got a really high test score so you can do anything you want. I'm like, I want to do infantry. He's like, okay, let's slow down. Let's back up a little bit. He's like, you can do anything you want. You can do intelligence. You can be a translator. You can, you can learn comms if you want to, like whatever you want. I'm like, no, I want to go infantry. That's who I am. That's what I want to do. Because I have this very innate sense, like if I wasn't doing the shittiest work, then it wasn't honorable. I didn't have any mentors in my life at that time. Because if I had a mentor at the time, they would have sat me down and been like, all service is good service. And you don't have to go into the military to be, a public service or be of service to your country. But I didn't. And so, my solution to these feelings was to serve in the military. And I don't regret it because I learned a lot of great stuff. But I enlisted, went to Fort Benning, which was, oh God, just a shitty 3.5 months, let me tell you. That, I knew it was going to be hard. Like I didn't have any illusions about it being difficult. I didn't know it was going to be exasperating. And that's a good way to put it. Like infantry training, 1 station unit training at Fort Benning on Sand Hill is just exasperating. Like you are taught from moment one that you can't do it right. Like there's no doing it right. Because the whole point is to stress you the fuck out and break you down and then build you back up. Now, for a straight A student like me, I'm like, here are the standards, then I meet the standards, then I get my gold star. Like that's how it's supposed to work. So I'm doing everything like I'm supposed to do. And this drill sergeant, and I don't know why to this day, but he specifically hated me. Like and it wasn't like an empowering thing where he's pushing me to be a better soldier or whatever. No, he really did hate me, and I don't know why, but he just made my life a living hell for the entire 3.5 months. It was a total shit. But the other 2 drill sergeants, I wanted to be just like them. I wanted to be everything they were. I mean, they had their shit together. They were really great about teaching all of us ethics. Like, here's why we go to war. Here's how you treat enemy combatants. Here's how you treat civilians. Here's why we do what we do. And this is what's proper to be a professional of arms. And, I look back on that experience as very formative because it taught me that I could go way beyond my own limits, way beyond what I perceived as my own limits. And it kind of instilled in me this drive to, I don't know, just be a better person in every way. And I've fucked up. I've had failures, as everyone does. But if I hadn't joined the Army when I did, I don't think I would still have this sense of drive and ambition, but also wanting to do the right thing and be a good person at the same time.
That's really, really insightful. And I think, as an infantry guy myself, the thing I always remembered about the infantry is that it taught me how to be comfortable with being uncomfortable.
Yes. Yeah.
It taught me how to, no matter what you do, it's going to be wrong, right? And especially in those training, and that's by design to make you, on some level, suffer and get used to suffering, to be able to embrace the suck, right? We all say it in the infantry, you embrace the suck, you bond in the suck, it brings you together, it makes you tougher. But it really, more than anything else in my experience, taught me how to be comfortable with discomfort. And that did serve me well later in life in ways I couldn't imagine in some of the hardest times of my life. And so you're in basic training in 2005. 15 years later, you wrote a piece for USA Today about a different kind of struggle, about what it's like to be a trans woman in America and traveling. And I want to go there because when I read that piece, it struck me because you've been such a powerful advocate for others, but also because you've been so candid about your own struggles and your own pain and your own sense of vulnerability. And so, as a former infantry soldier, you're moving in America in 2020. And I'm wondering, can you share the highlights of that piece for folks who haven't read it and that part of your experience and maybe how the two are even interconnected on some level?
That's a great connection. And I wanted to say real quick, you got it exactly right. Being a part of the infantry is about getting used to being uncomfortable and complaining all the time and just feeling shitty and trying to be comfortable with being shitty. The other day, I explained to a friend what the phrase means: if it ain't raining, we ain't training. Because I said that, and I wasn't thinking, because it's a civilian who doesn't know anything about the military. And she's like, what the hell does that mean? I'm like, oh, let me back up. And so I had to explain to her, like, the whole point of training is to put you into the most uncomfortable situations possible and make you sweat so that you don't bleed in war, right? And if it's raining while you're training, especially in the woods or outdoors or whatever, and you have to sleep in that shit, and it stresses you out, and it's just gross, and it makes, you know, doing combat missions harder. It makes your training better, because it's just one more obstacle you have to overcome, so that when you do, you know, get over, you know, downrange, wherever you're going, and you get into situations that are just enormously stressful, and you know, things that you wouldn't have thought to prepare for, at least you knew that you'd already gotten through some hard training already. So if it ain't raining, we ain't training, right? I think the way that this relates to so much of what folks in marginalized communities go through, like as you pointed out, is that we have a difficulty setting that's just a little higher than most people. And, you know, so if you are a woman, it's a little higher than men. If you are transgender, it's a little higher than cisgender people. If you are a person of color, it's higher than white people. If you are a religious minority, and on and on and on. And for trans women and for trans people in general, we have to really watch our backs everywhere we go, because we are not only often conspicuous, but we find that people will make an issue out of us being in the same space that they are. And in the USA Today piece, what I wrote about essentially were all the things, well, not even all the things, like really just a selection of things that I have to consider when I'm out in public. So for example, if I'm traveling somewhere, like, you know, I live in DC, if I'm going to, like, I don't know, Missouri, and I'm gonna have an airport layover, I look up the local non-discrimination laws in the city that I'm going to in Missouri, for the state of Missouri. I look it up for the airport layover. Let's say it's in like Ohio or something. I'll look up, you know, what Ohio is saying about transgender identities, so that I can make sure that whenever I'm in public in that airport layover, or you know, in that town in Missouri, I'll know what I'm entitled to in terms of my legal rights. Because in most states in this country, there are a lack of non-discrimination protections for housing, for public accommodations, for credit, for jury service, for adoption, you know, just really across the board for LGBTQ people, but specifically trans people. Like I could theoretically get arrested for using the women's restroom in, you know, say a restroom in a state that doesn't have those protections. Or I could get assaulted, which is even scarier. Like, getting arrested is one thing. Being assaulted and then, you know, possibly getting arrested, or having the, you know, law enforcement not care about it, it's a whole other level of difficulty. And so, you know, there are things that you do, like when I am outside of DC or a major metropolitan area, I make sure that I watch how much I'm eating or drinking when I'm in public. So if my friends and I go on a road trip, I am, you know, we stop at a restaurant, I'm going to make sure that I'm very careful about how much I drink, very careful about how much I eat, so that I don't have to put myself in a situation where I am, you know, in danger, or, you know, unintentionally antagonizing some transphobic person. If I'm here in DC and I go to use the restroom, there might be a long line, I walk the other way. I just don't go to the restroom. I'll just wait. Because if you stand in line and there's a tourist from a conservative part of the country, they might take my picture and then put it on Twitter, and then it becomes a whole meme for some very hateful people. There might be, you know, some guy who gets pissed at seeing a trans woman in line and comes over and tries to start trouble. I mean, this kind of happens to trans people all the time. And we don't talk about it as often because because if we did talk about it, it's all we'd ever talk about. You know, we get discriminated against all the time. Y'all just don't know about it, cis people in general, because we don't want to be a burden. We just want to live our lives. And so that's what the USA Today piece was about, because J.K. Rowling came out and said, well, you know, trans women in, you know, traditionally women's spaces makes us feel uncomfortable. And she does not reflect the views of the vast majority of cis women, by the way, cis women being women who are not trans. And, you know, our point is that we're on the same side here, because it's not trans women who are causing problems. It's abusive men who are not really being men, but, you know, cowards essentially, and being violent and discriminatory toward people who make them feel uncomfortable, essentially. And so that's what I was trying to say with the USA Today piece.
It was so powerful, Charlotte, because you really brought people into your view, what it was like to operate in to stretch the combat terms, right? Like you're living in a battlefield every day. Yes. And some battlefields are more complicated or intense than others. Sometimes it's enemy lines, sometimes it's friendly occupied territory, right? But to understand how precarious it is for you to do everything, to leave your house, to have to worry about whether you drink too much and that increases your vulnerability, to having to navigate other people's hate, right, on a bathroom line. It was very, very powerful, very important. I think very courageous. And you've continued to be out there, and you throw punches, right? You throw a lot of punches, especially online. This month, especially in this next couple of weeks, I've really wanted to delve into having conversations with fighters, people who are in the arena, right? We had Ron Perlman on, we have you on this week, we're gonna have others, but you're in the arena. I mean, every day you're a woman in the arena, whether it was, you work at HRC, putting out pieces, going to events, and especially on Twitter, you're mixing it up. Like you're out there, and I think consistently adding light to the heat, right? You are fighting, but you're fighting with information, you're fighting with your story and carrying forward the story of others. So I really wanna ask you, Charlotte, in this moment, where Black Lives Matter has now reached a tipping point and change is happening at a rapid rate, it's intersecting with pride, right? And now this historic Supreme Court ruling, which is a step forward on what needs to be many more steps to true equality in the U.S. But can you break down for us what you think is happening right now in this moment, and as a leader for the trans community, for the LGBTQ community, for the veterans community, for so many other communities, you're in a powerful position, I think, to be almost a translator across different movements. So what do you think about this moment, and how do you see the landscape?
I think for so long, people in marginalized communities have been trying to communicate that we face obstacles that go unrecognized by larger society. Whether it be Black people who are not treated with dignity and respect by law enforcement, whether it be LGBTQ people who are not treated with dignity and respect by the powers that be and lawmakers, whether it's disabled folks, women, whether it's veterans who continue to get denied proper health care by a VA that continues to be broken and critically negligent. All these marginalized communities are continuing to go unheard. And what we're hearing right now are those people being heard. We are hearing desperation being sounded out loud at a government that seems completely fine with leaving people behind that don't look like them, that don't serve in the military, that aren't of a different race, that are not LGBTQ or women or folks who are disabled or lack health care or work minimum wage jobs. All of these folks who so critically need a government that stands up for them, they're tired of having a government that instead shouts them down and tells them to just be quiet and take it. And I think we're not taking it anymore. We're not. What I really want to press forward to folks who are listening is I know that there are so many people who don't quite understand trans issues, not from even like an ideology, but for just conceptually, like maybe they don't get it yet. And we're not going after you. We're not trying to make your life harder, I promise. You are not the problem. I strongly believe in a carrot and stick approach. When a person approaches me in good faith, when they accidentally misgender me, when they don't quite know the terminology or they're just not up with the times, that's okay. Let's talk about it. Let's work it out real quick and move on. That's fine. It's when people are intentionally cruel and dismissive and I think abusive and oppressive toward others, that's when I get pissed and break out a stick. Because if you go after people who are marginalized, whether they be LGBTQ folks, veterans, people of color, etc., that's when I get into the game. That's when I'm going to punch your fucking lights out. That's where that goes. Because so many of these people don't have anyone fighting for them. They can see people fighting for them in the news, but in their own smaller communities, especially in the South, especially in the heartland, they feel alone. They feel like no one is sticking up for them. And so that's where our fight needs to be right now. And the last thing on my mind is whether or not some random white person is uncomfortable with the phrasing Black Lives Matter. That shouldn't, I don't give a shit. I don't. People are dying. We need to care about that.
Charlotte, can you talk about the Supreme Court decision and break it down in historical context, in technical context? I don't think, I didn't expect to go into this month having my source of hope for the future be the conservative Supreme Court on an equality issue. Right, it was not what I was expecting. Right, a 6-3 decision, I think, in the end. Right, after a series of almost annually, and the timing almost seems to work out. It's like right before Pride for the last 4 or 5 years in a row, and especially as someone who lives in New York, the founding place of Pride, right, where Stonewall was. Last year, I think it was for the show, we went outside of Stonewall and interviewed people to ask them what they thought about Trump's trans ban, right? So year after year, these changes are happening and these fights are happening. They're like battles in the larger war toward true equality for everyone in America, but especially for LGBTQ people. Please break down, Charlotte, this Supreme Court decision.
Yes. Okay. So the Supreme Court was trying to answer this question, whether the Civil Rights Act of 1964 protects people on the basis of gender identity or sexual orientation under the classification of sex as a class. Because sex, when the Civil Rights Act was passed, really just included, it was speaking to women, essentially. It was speaking to all people, but really was trying to protect women from discrimination. And, for the last 2 decades, federal courts, other than the Supreme Court, all the lower courts, have essentially said that gender identity and sexual orientation are covered under the Civil Rights Act. Now, those decisions have never been appealed up to the Supreme Court before, not for an outstanding decision, not for a finality. And so what the Supreme Court said in a 6-3 decision is that in the area of employment law, employment discrimination specifically, it is illegal to, discriminate against someone because they are LGBTQ. Now, this doesn't cover anything else at all. This only applies to employment discrimination. So it doesn't apply to public accommodations. It doesn't apply to housing. It doesn't apply to credit. It doesn't apply to jury service. It doesn't apply to adoption or access to healthcare. There are all these areas of public life that are so essential to how we live and how our loved ones live. Those are not covered by this decision. It's only whether or not someone can be discriminated against in the area of employment. Now, this is an interesting decision because, as you said, it's 6-3. Neil Gorsuch, who was appointed by Trump, wrote the opinion, the majority opinion, and Chief Justice John Roberts joined into it. And people were very surprised by this. And I mean, we were surprised too, quite frankly. I mean, we thought at best, a very slim majority might do like this thing where they're like, sexual orientation is covered, but gender identity is not, or the reverse, The thing is, though, is that Neil Gorsuch has kind of made his legal philosophy established on textualism. And it's this judicial philosophy where you take the text of legislation at face value. So you don't look at the original intent of the lawmakers. You're not trying to figure out who the co-sponsor of this bill, what he or she thought would be appropriate for the intent of the law. You're literally looking at the language itself and what it explicitly does. And so all these federal courts up to this point had gone off that textualism and said, well, yeah, if this is based on sex, who you love is based on sex. If you are getting a gender reassignment or you are identifying with an alternative gender identity, then that is also based on sex. So of course it's covered under sex. And Neil Gorsuch, being a proud textualist, had to say, you're right, you got me, you're right. If he had gone against this, he would have looked like an enormous schmuck, essentially. He would have.
Yeah.
Now, I'll tell you this though, I'm surprised by John Roberts.
Yeah.
I'm very surprised he went. Now he is a textualist, so to speak, but he's not a super strong textualist either. Right. So I was very surprised by it, and not to get super into game theory, because I find game theory annoying in general, but I have to wonder if he's doing like this thing where he concedes LGBTQ rights and he concedes DACA, which was the other big decision recently. Right. DACA was upheld. Right. In exchange for essentially overturning Roe v. Wade. Mm-hmm. Like that's the big fear right now. Mm-hmm. So we're very happy. We're thrilled that LGBTQ employment is protected and the DACA was upheld, and maybe we'll get a few other great decisions, especially with Trump's tax returns. But we're really worried about choice. Mm-hmm. And I want to be clear to people. The bodily autonomy of people in this country, and not just women, but everyone who should have the right to make decisions over their own body, that is under attack by this administration, by the Republican Party, and by activist judges who care far more about their interpretation of their religious beliefs than people's individual liberty. Mm. And we need to make clear to the country as a whole that that's unacceptable.
Mm. Thank you for breaking that down with such great dynamism. And it was a moment of hope, right? And trying to read between the lines about what it meant and where this could go, and if it's a trend or if it's a moment, right? And it was, surprising, I think, for most folks. It brought a little bit of a shot in the arm, I think, when folks needed it after all these months of turbulence and pain. But there's still, what I love about your work, Charlotte, is you obviously are involved in the Democratic side of politics, but a lot of what you talk about and the way you explain things is post-partisan, right? And a lot of our audience is independent. They don't have a political home, or they're not happy with the Republican or Democratic Party. And I think what you've been able to break down is how this is about principled American values, and about how it's about the text at times, right? Or about the pillars of our society. And you always have a righteous anger. Right, in the same way George Washington did, or Martin Luther King did, or Harvey Milk did. So, Charlotte Clymer, what makes you angry?
It makes me angry when vulnerable people are attacked, when vulnerable people don't have an equal stake in the public square. And I'm not just talking about race, gender, and sexuality. I'm not just talking about LGBTQ people and people of color and women. I'm talking about the veteran who goes back home and can't get proper medical care from his local VA center because they're, under just a very negligent and corrupt administration who can't seem to get their shit together to make sure this guy gets his medication. I get angry at the fact that there are, folks who have been working in coal mines in West Virginia for decades. And, we need to get to a more responsible use of energy, but we have to find these folks jobs and do it in a way that's ethical. And they're looking at their livelihoods being stripped away and trying to figure out what they're going to do and how they're going to put food on the table, why they're being painted as the bad guy simply for just running in the family business to keep their family clothed and fed and housed. That's unacceptable. We are watching folks see their jobs be shipped overseas or replaced by automation, or see these massive corporations just bankrupt communities by ripping out the corporate strongholds from the towns that they've literally built up with their business. It pisses me off. That makes me angry when people without power are essentially told that they're dispensable and that they don't matter. That makes me get up every morning ready to fight.
I love that answer, because it's an insight into how you fight and into how many different issues you've been able to fight effectively on, which leads me to a question that I have to ask you. You're from Texas. We had Ron Perlman on last episode, who blew up Ted Cruz and Matt Gaetz that continues to go on. If folks are listening, they haven't heard that, you got to go back and check it out. But I asked Ron if he would move to Florida and run against Gaetz, or move to Texas and run against Ted Cruz. But you're from Texas. Would you ever go back and run for office there or anywhere else?
I might do it. I might. I'll tell you what holds me back. There are a lot of talented people in my generation who are ready to run for office. They just need the platform to do it. I'm the kind of person, I know if I ran for office and I were at a town hall and some fucking clown got up and asked a really fucking clown question, I would treat them like a fucking clown. Now, a good politician, a good leader, is able to respond to clownery by bringing people together, by illuminating, by drawing a larger American narrative and saying, this is where we want to go, and we don't want to leave anyone behind. Right. Whereas if I heard some question about why are we letting the illegals in, I would say, you fucking moron, it's because they are human beings and our economy depends on them, and they're being exploited while your ass is telling everyone we should deport them. I mean, I get so angry that I'm kind of better as a driving force outside of the established political system. I will work with organizations and help out people run for campaigns and whatnot. But there are much smarter, much more organized, I would say much calmer people who are extremely well fitted to public service and advocacy within elected office, who are much better for that. And I would rather support them. We
finally found something we disagree on. I think that your ability to fight, your ability to call bullshit, your ability to be authentic, your ability to call someone a clown when they're a clown is part of what's refreshing and what we need more people to do in politics, because that's real, right? Like if someone walked up to your house or your family or your friends and acted like a clown, you call them a clown and tell them stop acting like a clown. But in politics, we kind of water it down. And I think it's created this almost acceptance of it, and the idea that politicians and our policy have to hear out racism or have to hear out hate or have to hear out just rude shit. And so I will challenge you on that, in that I hope that your authenticity and your willingness to fight represents what could be the future in politics, with respect, of course, but you come armed with facts, you come armed with experience, you come armed with skills. And we need more people like you. The people who don't want to serve, the people who don't want to run for office are the ones we need. And you didn't say no. So Ted Cruz is probably listening now after last episode, or at least somebody on his staff is. So they need to, they might hear your footsteps coming, Charlotte, right?
You know what,
the Texas Senate would be a fun place to watch you run.
That asshole pisses me off. Here's what pisses me off the most about Ted Cruz. It's not just that look, there are people who strongly believe in the Trump ideology. They're all in because they believe that everything Trump says is true. Ted Cruz knows better. He's actually a very smart person. Everyone who has ever been with him at Harvard or wherever the hell he went for undergrad and then law school and whatever, they've all said the same thing. This guy is incredibly smart. He's an excellent debater. He knows the issues inside and out. But he chooses to do the wrong thing because it's politically expedient and beneficial to his career, and that fucking pisses me off because it's exactly what is wrong with American politics.
It's cowardice, and it's also, the antithesis of the Texas spirit. Like, I love Texas. Folks who know me know that I go to Texas all the time, and I have lots of friends there, and I have a deep love for Texas and for the Texas spirit. And, a spineless guy like Ted Cruz is the opposite of what Texas is supposed to stand for, and someone with courage and grit and toughness, a woman like you, Charlotte, is the future of Texas, right? I mean, the Ann Richards of the world. Ann Richards didn't take shit, right? And that's the spirit of Texas too. So I'm just going to put it out there that I think you'd have a lot of support from any party, from all parties, from no parties. But in the meantime, we're going to watch you continue to fight and continue to do good work and continue to raise other people up. I love that you continue to do that. You raise up other voices. You drive money toward causes you care about. And you also bring a fun spirit. So we were talking before we started rolling about our favorite Bravo shows, right? But you talk a lot about pop culture. You talk a lot about TV and celebrity. But I want to ask you a question I ask of everyone else as well, Charlotte. Charlotte Clymer, what makes you happy?
There is nothing that makes me happier than a Saturday night in a friend's backyard with like 8 or 10 of your closest friends, drinking, talking about anything and everything having to do with the things that we like, and just being at peace and comfort with the people you love. Like, honestly, that's it for me. If I could do that for the rest of my days on this earth, I would be happy as a clam. If there were no battles to fight, if there was no problems that needed to be solved, I would have some kind of 9 to 5, doing good, honest work, and then going and hanging out with friends. That's happiness to me. And by the way,
yes,
my next step is going to be joining the military once this trans ban is over.
Really?
Yes.
You're gonna go back in?
Or getting back into it. Yeah. Biden is elected. He overturns the trans ban. I'm gonna get back in the military. I miss it.
Yeah.
My service is not over.
Active duty, reserve, guard. What do you think? I mean, they might.
I want to do active duty.
The irony would be if you get, you go join the DC National Guard and you get deployed like the DC National Guard did, I think, this week to defend the monuments from protesters, right? Which kind of is like something I've been trying to unpack, and I think is really important, and explain to people that, there are some folks who are cops, and then when they're not cops, they're in the National Guard, and then when they're not in the National Guard, the cops, they're protesting. So there are some folks that are spanning all 3 of these different phases, and you would be, an example of that, like someone who sees. So you would you go back in the Army, you go back in as an infantry officer, right?
That's what I'd like to do. Yeah, that's what I like to do.
And
yeah,
so
go to bulk and go to OCS and get it done. Yeah.
So Ted Cruz really hopes that happens.
Let me tell you, he wouldn't know shit about the Army, because in the Army there is instant karma, right?
True.
We both know that when someone doesn't have their shit together, you get corrected on the spot.
Yeah, I've been outspoken about the trans ban. We fought it at IAVA. I think we were one of the only veteran service organizations to oppose the trans ban, and talking about, from a national security standpoint, beyond the ethical and moral standpoint, the national security standpoint of ripping trans troops out of combat and the impact that has on the unit, and, essentially unpacking a decision that's already been made and in motion. But can I ask you, because we had him on the show and we had an amazing conversation, now that we've had some time away from the campaign, Charlotte, what are your thoughts on the impact of the Buttigieg campaign?
Oh, let me tell you something. Pete Buttigieg is one of the bravest people in politics. He and Chasten his husband Chasten, they're incredible people, wonderful human beings. I didn't always see eye to eye with Chasten, with Mayor Pete Buttigieg on policy, but that's okay. He was a trailblazer in this presidential campaign. He won Iowa, by the way, which not enough people talk about. The first openly gay presidential candidate to win a caucus or primary, which is incredible.
Right.
And it pisses me off to this day that Bernie Sanders did not fully recognize that. And I think he's the future of the Democratic Party. I really do, in so many ways. He's going to do incredible things in his career. And by the way, people criticize Pete Buttigieg for, his capitalist bents or whatever the hell, which, we can talk policy here and there, but this is a fundamentally decent, good human being who really does want to do right by others. And it pisses me off that we have devolved into this weird Hillary and Bernie divide, where the entire progressive movement is either Hillary or Bernie. That is so childish. No, most people are right here in the middle. They have some disagreements on policy. They may not always agree with how to go about things, but most folks really want to work together to get progressive goals advanced. We just have different ways of doing it. And Mayor Pete Buttigieg is one of those people. And I love him. I think he's fantastic. And he has been an enormously influential person to so many LGBTQ young people who want to go into politics and do a lot of good too.
I'm with you on that, and I agree. As an independent, he's the kind of person that pulls people into the party when so many people are driving him out, right? And having spent time with him, he didn't have to come on my show. It was risky for him. This was back when we had a live audience at the car club. He was earnest. He was straightforward, and he was, I said it to him at the time, he was a historically important person. Like the impact he will have for generations of kids who look up at the screen and say, I can do this, I can be like him. you know, and for veterans as well, right? Like breaking down the idea of like that veterans can actually be intellectuals, right? And they're not just knuckle dragging, you know, security guards, right? Like there's more to it. It was so important. And I think even now with the distance, we see how important it is. But let me ask you a quick question. I know we've got around. Do you think you're a force for I think the future in the Democratic Party? Can the Democrats fucking get their shit together and work together? Because even now, it's not happening, right? All the tribes are still out there, and you know, Biden is by default Jon Snow. I'm not seeing the unity that you know. It seems to be like it's not happening. What do you think is going to happen here, Charlotte? Can
this is what I tell people. This is what I tell people. The Democratic Party's greatest strength is that we are a diverse policy of thought and background. Our greatest weakness is that we are a diverse party of thought and background, right? So, you know, we're not lockstep. We're not like the, you know, less than nuanced, less than savvy, less than ethical folks in the Republican Party, because when they get marching orders, they all just come together and get it done. We don't do that because we're thoughtful. We want to make sure that people aren't left behind. We want to make sure that you know, factories aren't closed down, and that our environment is protected, and that LGBTQ people have rights, and that women aren't you know, left behind in the gender equality movement. I mean, that we're fighting white supremacy. All of these things we're trying to put together, and that's hard. That's hard when you get all of these folks into a big tent movement. So we're going to have fights. We're going to see, you know, Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez criticize Speaker Pelosi, and Speaker Pelosi maybe criticize, you know, whoever. That is what a healthy democracy looks like. Disagreement is healthy. It's really healthy. What's unhealthy is when we have our disagreement, we have a result, and people say, you know what, fuck this, I don't want to go along with it because it makes me uncomfortable. We still got to get things done. And I guarantee you this, if there are Republicans watching this, and especially if you know, Senator Cruz is watching this, November is coming. And you know, all of this infighting that you see the Democratic Party right now, folks are going to come together and kick some ass in November. I guarantee it. It's going to be an historic win. We're going to kick Trump's ass out. We're going to get back the Senate. We're going to pass the Equality Act. We're going to, you know, make sure that we, you know, reform the VA. All these things are going to happen, but we're going to have a lot of uncomfortable conversations along the way, and people need to start getting comfortable with being uncomfortable, because that's how good change happens.
You take us beautifully back to where we started, right? We go all the way back to Fort Benning, right? Where you and I both spent a lot of time. And now I have to give you in honor of appreciating the shit that you've had to endure throughout your life, and that you will continue to endure as a leader, because for me, being a leader is in part about sacrifice and about assuming some pain, right? I have to present you with some gifts to help ease that pain. So first off, I can't give these to you in person, and we will reconvene at the car club at some point and have lots of French 75s. But first, so I'm going to send you some Angry Americans.
Oh, I love it.
You're the best kind of Angry American, made by veterans at Oscar Mike in the USA. Another veteran supporting company that's been really great to this pod are our friends at Bravo Sierra. Military-inspired wellness products is antibacterial wipes that you will if you go back in the Army, you're going to be
MRE right there.
You're going to put these in your ruck all the time, and some deodorant and all kinds of other stuff that's cool. And then if people listen to the show, they know that I've become a huge fan of Uncle Nearest, and they are now a great supporter of this podcast. Our friend Jeffrey Wright turned us on to it. They are about the fighting spirit and about the future and about telling the history that needs to be told, which you have done throughout your career and your life, Charlotte. So I'm sending you some Uncle Nearest 1844.
I'm not going to say no to whiskey.
It's good shit. It's good shit. It's real good shit for the backyard. And then lastly, as is tradition on the show, we have 3 colors of Peeps. We have pink, blue, and yellow. And as we ask all our guests, Charlotte Clymer, which color of Peeps would you choose and why?
Pink, because it is the best color, hands down.
Why is pink the best color?
Pink wakes you the fuck up. When you see pink, you're not going to go to sleep. It's going to get you energized and ready to go.
I love that answer. That's great. That's great. Well, you have brought us energy. You're giving us energy for the future of this country. I am so thankful for your friendship. I am inspired by your example. I'm humbled by your presence and for joining me on Angry Americans. I want to thank you for all you do for this country and for so many people out there that don't have a voice. I can't wait to watch you run. Wherever you, whether, you know, this is one of those things where, like, I really hope you don't go in the Army, because the Army's going to get what they need out of you, right? I mean, if you maybe go in the Guard or the Reserves, be like Tulsi Gabbard or whoever else, it's like still running for office and still in the military. I hope they don't get you 100%, because we need you out here for so many voices and communities. And I wish you a very happy Pride. And I just want to thank you for all that you do and all that you are.
Well, thank you, Paul. And I really quick, I want to thank you and your team, and, you know, just especially all that you do. I mean, you are such an incredible bridge between all these different communities, and you're really bringing Americans together to get things done. And I appreciate that. And by the way, I want you to run for office. And I had planned to tell you this before coming on the show, by the way. I think you need to, and in fact, if you're listening to the show or watching, I want you to tweet at Paul to run for office. I don't care where it is, the state legislature, city council, you got to start somewhere, but you need to run for office, because we need someone like you in power and doing things for Americans.
Well, I appreciate you, and I appreciate you saying that. I am very happy to be where I am with no tie on and not have to deal with Ted Cruz. And being an independent is tough to find a path right now, you know, and I want to continue to, I chose this path because I think it's where I can make an impact. But most importantly, I appreciate it. You know, I'll be on your campaign and support you 100%. And you won't have to throw the punches. We'll get plenty of people lined up to throw punches for you. Political punches, not actual punches.
Maybe some actual punches too.
Yeah, and hopefully pretty soon we'll get together in person and we can toast to a lot of wins, and maybe DC statehood at some point too.
Yes, I would love it.
We'll be in the backyard with drinks and lots of good times. So thank you, Charlotte, for all that you do. Happy Pride. You're a great American, and it truly, you embody the best of what Angry Americans is all about. So my thanks to you, and stay frosty.
Stay angry.